All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. This is our fifth session, right? This is our last session of the CAHTA workshop series. Today, we're going to talk about how to conduct a feasibility study. Here's our agenda for today. Of course, we'll first define what is a feasibility study. We'll take a look at the financial template. We'll kind of walk through that. And then we're going to walk through each of the steps here. Some we'll spend a little more time on, some a little less time on, but we will walk through the steps of our feasibility study and talk about really how this all is associated with the template. So you're going to see me popping the template in and out of the PowerPoint and opening up the template. And then we'll finish up with getting started with your own feasibility study. So of course, first of all, what is a feasibility study? In the sense of this, is it a good business decision to build a hotel? Pure and simple. And of course, is it a good business decision? It's it can be defined in many different ways. Most of the time, it's related to the value of the hotel in the future, and that's certainly what we're going to be looking at. It could be very specific. The scenario could be defined, and you know what type of hotel you want to build. You know the location you're planning to build your hotel. It could be certainly be more open-ended. You don't know exactly the area. You don't know exactly which type of hotel you're planning to build. But going into the scenario that we will use in the training, we're going with the first one there, and that is that we know exactly what type of hotel, and we do have our location defined. There are certainly times when it's okay that no is a good answer after you complete your feasibility study. I know sometimes it's difficult for consultants to, after they've done this work for their client, they've amassed all this information and done their analysis and pulled everything together they feel like in some way they've cheated, right? Their client, the customer, to say, no, this isn't a good idea. But that's okay. And that's certainly, doing your client, your customer, the right way. Justice is to tell them no, if in fact that is the correct answer. We do know that unfortunately a lot of developments taking place, I can name markets in different countries around the world, have very much been ego driven. That development has not taken place for the right reasons. And unfortunately, that does and even continues to take place. And I'm sure it will continue to in the future. But here's the components of the feasibility study that we're going to cover. Each of these we'll cover each of these. Now, some of these, and you see them there, things like demand generators, forecast hotel performance and latent data. We're going to briefly cover those in comparison to the others, but we will talk about them just a little bit. There are some terminology that we need to define, and we don't provide you, some of these we provide you with a fair definition throughout the training, and you'll see as we come up to those. Some of these terms are going to be probably a little more familiar with than others. Some of these are going to no idea, right? Things like net present value or NPV. We're going to hear that one a lot today. Net operating income, net cash flows, terminal cap rates. Probably have an idea what those are. Closing cost. Now, if you've ever bought a home, you know what a closing cost is, right? An unlevered internal rate of return, or IRR, equity multiples, hurdle rates. We're going to define all of these. A draw schedule. You may have heard of a draw schedule before, and a pro forma. That's probably a term as well that most are familiar with. I actually have a little one-sheet kind of definition sheet for these. Defines all these terms that I can send out to you after the class and our wrap-up email that I'm going to send out. So we're going to make some assumptions, all right, in this scenario. Again, for the sake of this training, we're assuming that our construction time is a 2-year time period. Now that is very fast, and it's really, to be honest with you, not in line with the type of project that we're going to develop in our scenario. If it's a limited service hotel, yes, 2 years is probably a realistic timeline. I think more realistic would probably be a 4 to 5 year timeline. If you're talking about a higher end hotel, something that's a little more complex, luxury hotels, larger convention conference hotels, there's a lot more involved with those. And those can certainly take considerably longer. You could alter this template if you wanted to a bit to extend that construction timeline. But again, for training purposes, I think this 2-year timeline works fine for us. The model is going to assume that the hotel reaches its market stabilization after the 6th year of operation. So effectively year 8 2 years of construction, 6 years of operation. So in year 8, we're reaching stabilization there. The projected NOI in the 6th year of operation is going to be divided by the terminal cap rate. In this case, we're going to use a cap rate of 7.5% to determine then a hypothetical sales price. This price represents the net present value of all future cash flows from the asset discounted at the assumed cap rate. All right, now don't get too caught up on the terminology here and exactly what everything means. We're going to walk you through this, okay? Trust me. All right, so you can essentially see what it's saying here. You've got our net operating income for a total of 6 years. All right, you actually have year 3, which is your first year of operation. Year 4, 5, 6, and 7. Year 8 is actually not shown in box 9. I've tried to get it in there. No, push back from that one, but it is included down here in box 10. So this is your year 6 net operating income. Okay, so you can see how as it progresses here. Year 6 NOI. We got our terminal cap rate again at 7.5%. Total gross sales proceeds comes in at 29.7 million. That breaks out to 247.5 per key. We've got a closing cost of 3%. We'll talk about that a little bit later. That closing cost calculation then comes out to 891,000. That's how we come up with our total net sales proceeds of 28.8. Okay, and that is also then what you see entered here in the sales proceeds. Okay. So what defines a good business decision to build a hotel or not? The feasibility analysis compares the unlevered internal rate of return of the asset's anticipated cash flows with the investor's hurdle rate. And it really comes down to that simple comparison, the IRR compared to the hurdle rate, which can be thought of as their desired unlevered rate of return. Basically, it's the cost of the asset compared to the net present value of the lifetime returns from the investment. This is a combination of operating profits and sales of the asset, as you just saw earlier when we were looking at box 10. The sales price at any given point represents the anticipated net present value of the future returns from that asset. So looking down there in box 9, okay, in this hypothetical scenario that we have here, again, that cost is 19.4 million. That's construction cost. You see that over year 1 and year 2. Combine those together, you're going to come out to 19.4. Years 3 through 7 shows the net operating income again. Okay. And the hypothetical sales price worked in there as well. So we come up to a total of 38.8. All right. So once we've done those calculations, here, you see below we have our net present value from the construction through the hypothetical sales asset as of year 7, when it assumes again stabilization of the market. This table is going to show the unlevered internal rate of return, the IRR for this project. We're saying 14.9%. That maybe is a little bit low on the low side. I think. Anyway, please, if you have a comment as well about some of the numbers, please speak up. Which is above the investor's unlevered IRR hurdle rate of 12%, meaning that the project is economically feasible. So again, once we've done all of our calculations, we come out with our IRR of 14.9%. We've got our hurdle rate at 12%. Essentially, is the IRR greater than the hurdle rate? Yes, it is. It's a feasible project. Okay, so that's it. We're done. All right. Now, so we just went from step 1 to the end, from A to Z. Now we got to fill in everything in between. Okay, and that's what we're going to do. All right. So talk about some of the data that we're going to need to do our feasibility study. Much of this you will probably remember from CHIA training. You're going to remember some of this from the market study that we did earlier. Size and structure information, performance information, and we're gonna walk through each of these different reports and data, how they're used, what you're looking for in each of these. So, and it kind of explains a little bit right here, but we'll explain more later. Pipeline data, profit and loss data, your census data, forecast data, certainly other types of non-STR data that would be helpful, especially in your presentation to your stakeholders. And the stakeholders, the client could be a group of investors, could be an owner, could be a hotel company, could be a lot of people, depending upon who's doing this feasibility study, right? Different demographic data, different tourism related data, business information, economic data. Much of this we talked about last week. Different geographic data, and then political information as well, stability, regulations, and so on. So when creating a feasibility study, there are really two deliverables to that. First is the completion of the template that we're going to walk through. And then the second part is the visual part. And that's the presentation that you would present to a group of potential investors, or your client. We're going to do this in the form of a PowerPoint. We're going to show you several templates that you can use for that presentation. And essentially, just like we talked about with the market study and the other projects, you can use these as a template, or you can use them as a guide in creating your own presentation for your feasibility study. Application 7, this is our first one. This essentially takes the place of some quiz questions, I think, right? A couple of basic questions here. What is the very basic definition of a feasibility study? What are the basic variations of a feasibility study related to different variables? And then, is no an acceptable result for a feasibility study? And of course, there's our answers for those questions. All right, let's take a look at our template. And there are different models, of course, that are used. Many of these are proprietary. You think of companies like HVS or Jones Lang LaSalle. I'm thinking of others, consulting companies as well, not just developments that have created their own templates that they're using. But most of those models all do use some variety of data. They're going to use a lot of the same information that we're going to use in inclusion in our template. At the core of most of these templates is the calculation of the net present value of cash flows. And so most of those use the same thing that we're going to use, and that's the income approach to valuation of the asset once it reaches market stabilization. Okay, so while the templates may look a little bit different, it's a similar information, same process essentially. That may be a little more detailed in certain areas though. So in the training here, we have a template we provided you with. We've actually provided you with two templates in the Dropbox folder. You have one template for a full service hotel project and one for a limited service hotel project. These were developed primarily by Bob Nelson. Some of you may know Bob, great guy, up at the University of Delaware. Roger Plord, he's from Turnbridge Equities, so we do have some industry input on this as well, along with Jan DeRoos from Cornell and John O'Neill at Penn State, and a few other academics and industry folks that have certainly been involved along the way. I continue to reach out to a few of these, especially Bob, on a regular basis, and ask for his input. And we're doing tweaks, and we're learning things along the way as well. So if you do have any input, any feedback, suggestions related to the training or the template, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you, and we'll certainly pass that along as well. Okay. So the purpose of this template is to provide as a teaching tool, and it illustrates the current best practices at a level that's really appropriate for hotel management students. It's going to consist, the financial template consists of 4 tabs. The first tab, which we're going to spend a lot of time on, is the summary and assumptions tab. There are 13 different sections or boxes within that tab. And as we follow through the steps of our feasibility study, we're going to be entering information in all of those boxes. There are also 3 other tabs included in the template, and where we're going to be entering information, we're going to review information from others. You're going to see information carried over to others. Data from these extra tabs is then summarized on the summary and assumptions tab, the first tab, where all of the data is going to be entered. Data in this spreadsheet is color-coded. Cells with blue text or blue numbers, that's information that we're going to be entering. Cells with green text or green numbers comes from other parts of the spreadsheet. And then black text or black numbers is do not touch, okay? That's calculated by the template. Now, the spreadsheet is protected to help prevent you from overriding any of the formulas. It's going to screw up the model, okay? So don't worry about that. I do encourage you though, the template that we provided you with, we've already entered the information for this scenario for training purposes. Feel free to go through and change that, kind of play around with it when you have some time. Take a look at it. This is what tab 1 on the template looks like. Again, this is the summary and assumptions tab. As you can see, the blue text and blue numbers here, this is all information that we are going to be entering as we go through. Tab 2, this is our draw schedule. We're not going to be entering any information here, but you do notice there is green text, and that is carried over. Okay, the draw schedule is estimates the construction expenses, which again are going to occur over that 24 months of construction period in our scenario. There you go. Okay. Tab 3, ADR and occupancy projections. Here we will be entering some information on competitor hotels. We'll also be doing some historic, as you can see, entering some historic performance information here related to our market performance. Tab 4, this is our 6-year pro forma. We are going to be entering some information here as well, some of the P&L information and expense information we're going to be entering here. And as you can see, the green text also is some that's being carried over. So many of you may be familiar, if you've done any sort of accounting before, certainly any sort of development studies, a 6-year pro forma is something that you'll be familiar with. If you see the arrow message, now I've never had this pop up when I'm using it, but if you are entering information, kind of playing around with it, if you do see an arrow message pop up regarding a circular reference in section 8, just enable the interactive calculations in your settings in Excel, and that will allow that to stop looping on you, and you'll be okay to go there. All right. Do we have any questions before we get into our first step? Are we ready? Okay. First of all, step 1, defining our project. That's obviously the most critical part, right? Determining the location of our hotel. We need to go ahead and get the coordinates for our project. You can use Google Maps to do that. That's one way, number of ways you can do that. Google Maps, if you've never done it, just put your cursor right on top of where that hotel is going to be built or developed. Right click, and you can click what's here, and that will then pop up the latitude and longitude to show you those exact coordinates. When it also comes to the proposed hotel that we're going to develop, it's helpful if we can go ahead and decide on some of this information. In the scenario, we're doing this in this for training purposes. Again, if you can decide what is the scale of hotel that you plan to build, what is the chain or parent company, what is the number of rooms, the meeting space, if it is some special type of hotel. We give you some examples here of a few, like an all-suite hotel, a boutique hotel, extended stay, for example. Will it have a restaurant? Very important. Amenities, other amenities that may be included, and also square footage of your hotel. For the purpose of the training, we're going to be using a sample project to demonstrate the steps involved in the feasibility study. So for our project, we are developing a Hyatt in Nashville in the Central Business District. Okay, that is an upper upscale hotel, of course. It's going to have 300 rooms. It's going to have 10,000 square feet of meeting space. And then we're going to backdate this project if we're conducting this study in 2017. So all the reports that you see will be as of that time period. We want to open up our financial template. We want to proceed to the summary and assumptions tab. We're going to be entering data into the salient assumptions section 1. We're going to enter some basic information about our hotel. Again, the name, the location, the number of rooms. Now the square footage, we've already determined what that's going to be. That is determined from, as it says here, it's going to include the public spaces, lobbies, hallways as well. If it is a franchised property that you are developing, oftentimes there will be a franchise disclosure document that will have some of this information in there. What is the average square feet for this type of property? What's the average square feet for a room or for a suite? Our model is going to default here to 550 square feet per room, but as it says, a suite, for example, might be a little bit larger, maybe 700 or even a little bit larger than that. The food and beverage square footage amount includes restaurants and meeting spaces. The STR data includes meeting spaces. We do have that for existing hotels. So that's something that you could look at as well to get an average for a particular type of hotel or a particular chain. The franchise and disclosure agreements, again, will typically include some estimates for that. What are the averages? We're going to enter an inflation rate. Now, the model that we're going to use is 3%. That could be a little bit higher. That could be a little bit lower. The average here in the United States has been around 3.76. So we're using 3%. It's just, again, for training purposes. Now, we do understand, this is probably an excellent place to mention this, since we have so many included in this workshop from different countries around the world. Obviously, your numbers may be a little bit different. Could be higher, could be lower. But again, I encourage you can go in and still and kind of play around with the template, enter the numbers that will make sense for your local market, for your local country. All right, so this is what it's going to look like. This is the ceiling assumptions tab. This is where we're entering that information. Let me pop out of here real quick. I want to open up our template. Come on, template. There we are. Everyone see that? Is that large enough to see? Is that a little bit better? Good. All right. Can everyone see this box up here? This is the summary and assumptions. This is tab 1 of our template. This is the first box up here. This is where we're entering the information. Again, the name of our hotel. It's a downtown hotel, 300 rooms, 550 square feet per room, 10,000 square feet of overall food and beverage space. The name of the project, it is the Hyatt Nashville Downtown. We entered an inflation rate of 3%. Excuse me, and our base year is 2017. Okay. Sorry, it takes me a little while, second to go back and forth, but I do think it's important for you to kind of follow and be able to follow along with the template. Here we want to get a map of our market. We can use Google Maps for this. You can use the snipping tool from Google Maps to identify, where your hotel is at. You can then draw out that map, and then you can paste that into the Excel, into the template. You can also include that same map, of course, in the presentation. During the market performance section, we're going to identify the approximate boundaries of the market and the submarket. And during the comparable hotel section, we're going to identify approximate locations with similar hotels. Now, these are all things that we can include on that map in our feasibility template as well. During the demand generator section, we're also identifying different demand generators. We mentioned a few of those here: major attractions, businesses, hospitals, universities, retail centers, sporting events, entertainment venues, right? You kind of go on and on there with demand generators. These are things as well that we could include on our map. So here's box 2. And as you can see, we have gone in and we have snipped a map of the downtown submarket in the Nashville market. And that's the area that you see in the middle of the map here. Okay, you see the Cumberland River running through downtown there, and then we've got our location for our hotel, which is just a short distance from our new Nashville Music City Center. That's a brand new convention center there downtown. Beautiful building. Just check it out. All right. In addition to the Nashville case scenario, there are 3 options that instructors can use to provide participants with hands-on experience and to apply the training content and steps by using a more personalized project. Instructors can choose a project that is more relevant to their students. For example, you can select a hotel, a location near your university, for example, and demonstrate the content at each step as they're presenting and training while participants are watching. The instructors can also present portions of the training and then have the students duplicate the procedures, or they can have groups conduct separate steps so that they're all working together as a team on one single project. And that's probably a very realistic, right? A realistic way of doing it. Instead, or in addition to this, at the end of the training, instructors can assign a project for students working in separate groups or by themselves to complete after the training. Here's, at the end of each of these steps, there is an application, and this essentially is just going back over the steps for completion of that step, okay? Exactly what would you need to do? All right, what are you entering? What information are you entering? Where is it being entered at? Step 2, determining the development cost and the construction loan information. Now, our model and that we're using organizes development cost into standard classifications. You can see those here. I'm not going to read the definitions. you're probably familiar with most of these though. Hard cost, soft cost, a contingency, and FF&E. The first sentence in each of those explains exactly what they are if you're not familiar with those. Hard cost comprises the actual physical cost of the construction, building materials, site excavation, utilities, landscaping. Soft cost is the actual construction of the project. It includes things like fees, architectural fees, interior designer fees, feasibility study fees, approvals, legal fees, attorney fees. All that's going to go into soft cost. So it's not part of the actual construction cost. That's going to be in hard cost. It's everything else there. Contingency is essentially saying, what do we run over budget? Let's put money aside if we run over budget, so we do have a reserve for that. And then, of course, FF&E, furniture, fixture, and other equipment. And we can see there all the different things that are going to go into that. So these are some of the standard cost classifications that we're going to be using. Now, there are two sources for averages when it comes to development cost. Typically, if you're developing a chain hotel, they will have information on the standard cost that will be in the franchise disclosure document again, as we talked about earlier. Another one is HVS's Hotel Development Cost Survey. They display the average cost per room. They do have their classifications a little different than what we use at STR, but they are very close when it comes to cost. They do have, land. They call them land, hard construction, and site improvement. They have soft cost, and then they have furniture, fixtures, and equipment as well. Their categorizations for types of hotels are a little bit different than, for example, the STR chain scales. You're familiar with the chain scales. They use luxury, full service, select service, limited service, and economy. Those will, kind of roughly equate to the scales though, don't they? So here's an example. This is a little kind of a summary takeaway from that HVS Hotel Development Cost Survey. Again, in different countries, these numbers will be different. All right. You can see the categories there. And again, this is the average cost per room that you're seeing here by different types of hotel. You see, we start with economy, goes down through to luxury, the land cost, hard cost, soft cost, FF&E. Okay, one thing we didn't talk about pre-opening and working capital, but all that we go in together to get then our total average per room cost per key or per room. All right. So that's a good guide, at least something to work off of. With lack of, if you do not have any detailed on a particular type of hotel, that is certainly good information to use right there. We want to find section 8 on our summary and assumptions tab of our financial template titled sources and uses of funds. We're going to enter a per key amount for the land purchase price. We're going to enter a closing cost of 3%. Again, could be a little bit higher, a little lower. We're going to use 3%. We're going to enter a per key room amount for the hard cost. And we're going to use the information from the HVS survey, and then a percentage for the soft cost, as you're going to see here in a few minutes. Enter a contingency percent for hard and soft costs. We're going to enter 5% as our contingency amount. We're going to enter a per key room for FF&E, also taken from the HVS survey. We're going to enter a percentage for the pre-opening and working capital. And as it says there, that can range anywhere from maybe 2 to 4%. We're going to use 3% for our hotel project. Enter a percentage for a broker fee. We're entering 0.75. Reality, that's probably a little low. Those are probably more like 1 to maybe 1.25, 1.5%. We're going to enter 0.75% for our brokerage fee. Totals will be displayed at the bottom, including the cost per key amount. This is also something that most probably know. If you've worked in hotels, you may know this. Many people refer to the rule of 1,000, which simply means that you can take the total cost per key and divide it by 1,000 to arrive at a pre-opening average daily rate for your proposed hotel. All right. So other things can obviously affect that opening rate, but at least that gives you a ballpark to work around, right? So this is that part of our template, sources and use of funds. Let's jump back out there. Let's go to our template real quick. This is going to be section 8. Okay. And you can see that information right here. Does everyone see that box? We're still in the first tab. We're going to go to the section 8 here, this box right here, and you can see the information we're entering. Per key, land purchase price, we're entering a closing cost of 3%. We've got our total hard cost here per key, a hard cost contingency of 5%, a soft cost of 20%, again, a soft cost contingency of 5%. We've got our pre-opening working capital at 3%. We have our brokerage fee at 0.75%. Okay. Again, everything else that you see in the black will be amended based upon what you're entering there in the blue. Right. So that's all that you're entering. Okay. Developers generally utilize a combination of a construction loan and cash to build their new hotel. There are also numerous additional investment vehicles that you can be used to finance a project. The loan to cost value. The construction loan amount is a percentage of the total project cost. This depends upon the current lending conditions. Today, and this is probably about 3 years ago, we could say this, probably not today. Today, 65% is reasonable loan to cost. A few years ago, a company with a strong record might get 80% of loan to cost. After the last recession, when banks were really having difficulty, they would be lucky if they could get half of that, half of the loan to cost value. Interest rates as well. The rate interest is going to be paid as funds from the construction loan are drawn. The current rate, we're going to use 5.5%. That also is going to be maybe a little lower than that, or depend upon the type of loan. It could be higher than that as well, right? I've heard these can go as high as 10 to 12%, which is kind of crazy. But the origination fee, this is the fee paid to the lender in exchange for making the loan. 1% sort of a standard there, and so that's what we're going to use in our training. Interest must be paid on the construction loan while the hotel is being built. So during construction, typically the only amount that we're drawing upon is what we need for development. After construction, then we'll go ahead and get a mortgage, and then we're going to pay off the loan, anything remaining on the construction loan. Since the hotel is not operating though, for those first couple of years while we're under construction, we need to borrow additional funds in reserve to pay the service on those payments, right? So the interest on the loan itself, as we're using it for those first couple of years in construction, we're going to need to borrow that as well. Interest is generally only due on the portion of the loan that has been used for the project. The average percent drawn, on average, about 65% of the loan is actually funded over the duration of the construction. No changes should be made to this amount. This could be covered again in a more advanced real estate finance class. So box 7 here, construction loan assumptions. We want to find that section, that box in our template. We want to enter the loan to cost percentage, the interest rate, the origination fee, and the average percent drawn. So let's pop out here. Let's look at our template. This is going to be box number 7. Okay, that's still on tab 1. Okay, right down here at the bottom, construction loan assumptions. Okay, again, our loan to cost, 65% is what we're entering there. Our interest rate at 5.5%, a 1% origination fee. The average percent drawn is 65%. Okay, so we're only entering those 4 numbers. All right. And then, of course, here's our application that's going to walk us through some of the resources and things we're going to enter there. All right, I'm going to pause after every couple of steps to see if you have any questions. Do we have any questions so far? Either I've totally confused everyone or you're following along perfectly and everything makes total sense. Are we okay? Okay. All right, let's talk about now step 3, demand generators. As we know, a demand generator is really anything within the market that's going to help us sell rooms in our hotel, right? As we mentioned a few of those earlier, And this is where we want to really put together a list of those different demand generators. We could put those on the map, as I mentioned earlier. We certainly want to talk about those during our presentation to our investors. Here's an example of that map of Nashville, and we've entered some of these demand generators. And really, when you think about demand generators, sometimes you really have to think, some of those are going to be a little more obvious perhaps than others. Again, our proposed hotel, as we saw earlier on the map, is going to be right down here in the center of downtown near this convention center. There are a lot of other things that are around that convention center in our market. We have a Country Music Hall of Fame. We have an arena. This is a sporting arena where they also do concerts. We have our Symphony Hall. Broadway, that is our entertainment district, Lower Broadway there. That's where you see all the music venues, our honky tonks. This is Titan Stadium. That's our football stadium, our NFL football stadium right across the river. We have a baseball stadium here, a field. Hospitals, universities, the music industry is heavily located near that, just south of downtown. We've also included two outliers, which are big draws, big demand generators for our market. This one up here, of course, is the Opryland Hotel and the Grand Ole Opry. If you're familiar with country music, you'll know what the Grand Ole Opry is. And then the Nashville International Airport out here to the east of the city as well. So these are all these are a few certainly demand generators. We want to list those. We can create our list. We can talk about the type of demand generator they are, the number of rooms we anticipate them generating, the frequency in which, is this something that they're routinely holding events? Is this something that's going to, for example, the Titan Stadium, this is going to be an every weekend or every other weekend type of demand generator, not continuous. And then, so you get the idea with this list. Step 4, economic performance of the market. In this section, we're going to estimate the occupancy and the ADR growth for the next 5 years for our market. This is really a challenging area here. Because obviously, again, this is a forecast, right? We're making some educated guesses on what we anticipate performance looking like in the future. The next 4 steps will allow you to collect information to help you make these estimates. We can look at economic performance of the market, historic hotel performance, future market supply changes, and forecasted hotel performance. If that's available, we can look at these things. It's important to analyze the economic conditions that will impact the proposed hotel. There's a very similar step in the how to conduct an economic analysis. We talked about that last week. This analysis is focused on the specific market or the city where the subject hotel is located. We're looking at market level data, and you can also, we talked about some of the resources for some of that economic data last week, specifically here in the United States. And of course, there's comparable agencies and organizations and entities around the world that would typically have that type of information. Here's some of the things we looked at last week, and these are things that we would want to draw upon as well, pulling this information as well. It could be important for us when talking about the economic performance, the outlook for our market. We listed several of these last week: GDP, things like wages, personal income, employment, population change, things like this. Some of the data in the US is only available at the state level. Yeah, we talked about that last week as well, right? It may be available at total country versus market. So some additional information that could be helpful: economic data, things related to gas prices, mass transportation, vacation trends, senior citizen influence, foreign travel. Some of these things, I think of Nashville, for example. Mass transportation is an issue here in Nashville. We essentially don't have a good solution for mass transportation. Is that a drawback? Absolutely it is, especially if you're looking at building a large upscale hotel in the middle of downtown, right? Transportation in and out of the city center could be an issue as traffic and population continues to grow. Is that something that's worth mentioning? Yeah, probably so. You're typically looking to correlate the various types of economic data. Things we looked at last week, again, things like demand or ADR. We talked about R values last week to see if there were certain correlations there. So here's just some examples. I'm just going to kind of flash through these because we went through these last week. in the class all of these examples here, and even looking at the Nashville market. Okay, but these are things we would want to include in our presentation for our feasibility study as well, so that our investors really do understand market conditions, right? So these would all be very important to include. Absolutely. All right, economic inputs. So at a later stage, we'll be estimating future performance as it relates to just occupancy and ADR growth. We're going to be entering percentages into the market growth assumptions section for the next several years. Your estimates will be based upon the economic data, the historic performance, the future projected hotel performance, future supply performance again, and latent demand, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. For the presentation, it's highly recommended to include several graphs of economic data, as you just saw some examples of for your market. All right, and this is going to walk you through again those steps. I'm going to pause here again after step 4 to see if anyone has any questions at this point. Okay. I trust that your mute buttons are not broken, that if you do have questions, you will unmute and ask your questions, okay? Or offer a comment as well, please. All right. Step 5, historic hotel performance in our market. So it's really important for us to understand how our market has historically performed. So this is very similar to what we did in our market study when we were looking at taking a longitudinal approach and looking at our trend report. And you remember in the market study, the things that we looked at there was the overall market. We also looked at data by class, right? For example, we looked at data by submarkets. So those are some of the same things we're going to do for our feasibility study here, but we're going to focus on the market, the submarket, and then the particular class of the type of hotel that we're proposing. All right. These are components that were taken directly from the market study, and we're going to talk later about an expanded version of the feasibility where you could actually include some of this to sort of set the groundwork for understanding the market. So the reports and data we're going to need here, you're going to get a trend report for the market and for the submarket class of our proposed hotel, okay? The market and the submarket class. We're going to be creating some line graphs for our presentation so that we can show the performance of the market. And then we're also going to be entering some of this information later on into our template. So here's some examples. Again, you saw these in the market study, right? For Nashville, overall Nashville market here, supply and demand, occupancy and ADR actuals, percent changes, right? So these should look familiar to you. Okay, we're going to, we're not actually entering anything to the template at this point, but we need to identify some of the information, and these are things we're going to include in those slides. So we're going to review the historic data, estimate where you think the performance will be headed into the future, especially for your submarket class. You can share those slides then with your class, with your investors. All right, step 6, future market supply changes. Of course, another important aspect of this is to look at recent supply changes in your market, also future hotel development. Those are going to be potential competitors, right? Either existing competitors or competitors that could be opening down the road or in the future. So there are 2 pieces of the supply puzzle here, right? Some of this information, we can get the historical development information. We can get from our trend report as well, right? Because we include in that the census property and room information. But then the other component, another report that we can really get this from is our pipeline report. And so we want to get a pipeline report on our submarket, okay? And you could get it on the market, but we really want to focus on what's happening in that immediate area. So we want to get a pipeline report on our submarket. And as we know, there's different tabs included in that report. And we're able to, on that second tab, that supply summary tab, we're able to see information on existing supply by scale within our market. We have information there on recent changes to supply by scale, right? Looking at back over the last 6 years. We also have information there on current hotel development, number of hotels and number of rooms, okay? What we really then want to focus in on is what is it? What is the recent? What does recent development look like? So, and then what does the snapshot of existing supply look like by scale, specifically focusing on the type of hotel that we're looking to develop? Okay. We can also then look at hotel projects as well and say, okay, how many rooms are in development? And again, focusing on a particular scale that we are developing. Again, those are potential competitors, aren't they? We've put together a slide here. You saw this in the market study. We pulled this now into our presentation for our investors as well, so they can understand the current development landscape. What does that look like for our sub-market? The excuse me, the property tab, data tab that's in the pipeline reports, that's going to give us some really valuable information. That's going to give us detailed information on hotels in the market, right? Existing hotels, as well as those that are in various phases of development. This is where we can really now drill down and identify potential competitors. You look, for example, right here, you know, we're building a Hyatt, which is an upper upscale hotel. Well, when we look at our sub-market pipeline report, we see here there's an Embassy Suites being built by Hilton, another upscale hotel, 506 rooms, 30,000 square feet of meeting space. We have their projected opening date, and we have the address of that project. So real important that we can identify other types of hotels that are in planning or already in construction. We're not inputting any of this information into our template, but it's definitely information that we want to be able to present to our investors. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop there. Let's take a quick pause. Do we have any questions over these last two steps? Good. Okay. Now, step 7, this is forecasted hotel performance and latent demand. This could be optional in an abbreviated version of this. We're including it. First of all, talk about forecasted information. How can we get a hold of that? Well, as you know, STR does produce market level forecast reports on a quarterly basis. We produce these for the top 25 markets here in the United States. Those are the 25 largest in number of rooms for the most part, as well as another 44 or so markets outside of the United States. And as we mentioned, those are going to be the larger capital cities, larger metropolitan markets, gateway cities in countries around the world. So if one of those is available, certainly that's going to make it a whole lot easier for you when you're making your forecasting assumptions here. Another option here is an STR custom forecast report. Now, we typically do not, just because of the time involved, we do not provide these for academics training. Okay, we recommend that if you're doing this project with your students in the classroom, that you do this using one of the markets where we have a forecast report available already. For industry, of course, we can't produce these on a group of comparable hotels. So very similar to the selection criteria you would include in a trend report when a select group of hotels. You remember those guidelines and requirements from our CHIA training, right? So, but we can produce those custom forecasts for really essentially any area that a client might want to see. Excuse me. So once we have our forecast report, and as mentioned, Nashville is in the top 25 markets, so we have one available there. We want to look at our annual forecast, and we know in that annual forecast tab, the annual outlook tab, I should say, in the forecast reports, it's going to show you there the last several years of actual performance on an annualized basis, as well as the next 5 years forecasted annual performance. You have that for all 3 KPIs, your raw data, and your year-over-year change. We can put that together in our presentation as well. Yeah, great slide there, looking at forecasted performance for Nashville. So there's not any inputs as well in the financial template related to the forecasted hotel performance for the overall market. But important to include that in your presentation. In the market and growth assumptions coming up soon, there is some inputs, but that's going to be to a specific group of hotels, as we're going to get to. Now, this is an area that I think is kind of interesting. And maybe one of the more challenging areas to come up with the right numbers, right? Latent demand. As it says here, one part of the feasibility study is to estimate latent demand, which contribute to an increase in demand for your hotel. There are two parts to latent demand. That is unaccommodated demand related to sellout nights and overflow. And then part two, the second part, or contributor to that, I should say, is induced demand related to the special features and attractiveness of the proposed hotel relative to the comparable group. That to me is probably one of the more challenging ones to come up with, especially if it's, I mean, what if you're building a limited service hotel? How do you come up with that part? Yeah, I don't know exactly. If there's some special feature within your hotel, I could see how that would be much easier to calculate. You know, if I have a draw, some sort of a water park or something like this connected to my hotel, yeah, then I could see how that might be a little bit easier for me to do. For the unaccommodated demand, you can use daily data for the comparable properties to determine the number of sellout nights. Now, we're basing sellout nights as anything that is 90% or higher. Again, you may have your own opinions about that, but that's what we use. We use 90%. So we have a trend report here. This is based upon a group of 5 comparable hotels. We're going to talk about those more here in just a minute, how we, the selection process and which hotels those are for our market. But we have our trend report. We have daily data. So essentially, all we need to do is go through and sort that by occupancy and year, okay, or by year, and then by occupancy to determine the number of nights that had an occupancy level above 90%. Once we've done that, we can add those up and we have our sellout nights, our annual sellout nights. So essentially what we're talking about here is overflow, right? With the assumption being that our competitors are going to be sold out 100 nights out of the year, how much of that demand then will come to us? All right, so that's what we're trying to calculate here. We're going to find section 5 on the summary and assumptions tab of our financial template. We're going to enter percentages for year 1 and year 2 of our operations. The percentages reflect whether there will be any latent demand or not, including both unaccommodated and induced demand. That's part 1 and part 2 that we talked about a while ago. So entering a 0% would mean that there would be no latent demand added by the new hotel. 100 would mean that all of the latent demand would be offset by the increase in supply. We will keep the default of 75% for year 1 and 0 for year 2. So we're saying that, yes, we are going to be able to bring in some of that latent demand in year 1, but by year 2, everything is sort of going to level out and we're going to drop that back down to 0. So here's what that looks like. This is the subject property latent induced demand. Again, we're going to go to subject property induced demand. Operation year 1, we're entering 60%, as we just mentioned. Operation year 2, we're going to be entering 0%. All right, and we may need to fine tune that as it says here. Okay, based upon how strong the market is, other conditions, that could also be impacted as well. All right. Okay, good. Do we have any questions real quick? Okay. Step 8, market growth assumptions. So using data from steps 3 through 7, we want to estimate the future occupancy and ADR growth. We're going to review our demand generators. We're going to determine a growth rate for occupancy and ADR for the next 5 years. And then we're going to make the case, so you can make the case for a positive, consistent, or negative growth. Definitely want to be conservative in this area. Negative numbers or 0 growth is okay to enter, specifically if we're in a market that's facing some sort of economic downturn or some other issues that might cause a slump in the market. We're market growth notes here. The market growth assumption box in the model is where you're going to input your percentages for your market's future occupancy and ADR growth. It's important to emphasize that these inputs reflect the market growth, not the growth or change in your specific hotel's performance. We're going to adjust these metrics and defend your adjustments. First, in this box, base year refers to this year, the current year. Projection year 2 coincides with your hotel's first operation year, which is year 1 of the penetration box. And then projection year 4 coincides with the 3rd year of the operation, which is the stabilized year. ADR by default, we're going to enter 3%. That's the annual inflation rate, again, that we're going with. After year 4, we're considered reach stabilization. It's going to, at that time, level at 0 for occupancy growth. Then ADR is going to assume that it's going to just continue to grow at annual inflation of 3%. So here we go. This is what we're looking at here. This is the market growth assumptions box. And what we're again entering is the amount of decline or growth in occupancy over the next 4 years. So because of the introduction of this new supply, we do, and maybe other supply that we see in our pipeline report, we're making the assumption that occupancy will decline the first year, base year, and the first year of operations. By year 3 or year 2 there, or 3rd year, we're going to reach 0, and then we're going to start to grow at 1%. ADR, as we mentioned, we're going to say that we're going to initially inflation rate 3% is what we're going to use. We're going to use that for the first couple of years, and then we're going to lower that down to 2%. Again, this could be determined by different market conditions. Let's pop back out there real quick. Let's look at our template. We haven't done that in just a little while. So let's look at our template, talk about where we're going to see this information. Okay, that's going to be right up here. 4. Okay, box number 4, market growth assumptions. Here's where we're entering the information for demand or occupancy, and here's where we're entering the information for our ADR. Okay. All right. We're moving right along. We are at step 9, so just a few more steps to go. Do we have any questions real quick?
So Dwayne, just a quick question. Obviously, yeah. This is new construction, so and I haven't looked at the model, so maybe that's gonna be, you're gonna answer my question because of that. But if this is new construction, technically your hotel ADR is going to be lower, is going to have a lower penetration than the market or comparable set. So shouldn't you, and then there's going to be a ramp up stage for stabilization. So technically speaking, yeah, probably the first two years, your growth rate will be more than 3% because it kind of needs to catch up to the market. So my question is, I mean, maybe I haven't seen.
I wouldn't make that assumption, but okay.
Okay.
I would make the assumption that you're automatically going to have to catch up to market. I think it depends on the hotel. It depends on a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's a lot that goes into that, but okay.
Yeah, well, that was my question. It just seems that 3% is a bit low.
Okay.
In terms of how it's ramping up, but again, maybe I shouldn't have asked the question because I should have looked at the model first and understood the model.
No, certainly. I mean, no, that's a good observation. It was a good time to bring it up because we just talked about those, making those, forecasting that growth over the next 5 years, is an important part of the model. So, yeah, no, it's a good time to bring that up. And you're thinking, I mean, 3% you think is low? You think it would be? We would be more aggressive and raise that?
Probably the first 2 years, yes. Usually, when a new hotel comes to market, obviously it's new, it's trying to gain market share. It's not going to come in, let's say, if we're talking about a Hyatt, and it's not going to come in at the same price as its competitors are. It's going to come in at a lower rate. Obviously, it's also part of that is also because it has no demand, so it's trying to build demand. So that's going to be a way of it being able to steal some of its competitors' demand, and at the same time be able to generate some new demand. So that's why I'm saying that probably that 3% for year 1 and year 2 seems a little bit low. Just because it's going to catch up in the next 2 or 3 years. That's usually probably what the ramp up stage is, 2 to 3 years. ramp up.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. But I do, I go back to what I said earlier. I think, that's going to be unique for every type of hotel and specifically to the location. I can think of situations where you have a new hotel developed where there are not a lot of local competitors and competition. That's going to be a very different story than those that are entering a market that's already sort of built out, then, with a great number of, competitors already, where you are going to have that challenge of, well, you're going to have to build demand from nothing. Some markets you go in, there is no comparable existing. You are essentially going to have the immediate demand because there's nothing else there that was meeting that demand need. So I think it really comes into it's every scenario being a little bit different. I think this scenario you could say 3% is probably good. This scenario you could say yes, they're probably more aggressive on that growth. That number should be higher. This one over here, you can come up with a lot of different scenarios, and that's where it's good. And it's really great, in the classroom with students to discuss those scenarios and again, play around with the template a little bit, enter the different amounts and see how it plays out.
Got it. Thank you.
That's good. No, excellent. Excellent. So let's look here at step 9. This is selecting comparable hotels. One of the key components of the feasibility study is to identify other comparable hotels in our market. And this is very similar to what we do in the CHIA, in the benchmarking part of the CHIA, when we're looking at selecting our competitive set. Remember that? So we call them comparable hotels rather than a competitive set in this case. It is possible to have more than one competitive set or comparable set. As we talked about in the CHIA training, we talked about some of the situations when you may need to have more than one competitive set. Well, for those same reasons, you could justify having more than one comparable set. For the sake of the training, though, we only have one. All right. Of course, we're going to start with that radial participation list. We're going to then, once we have that participation list, we're able to then start looking at what makes the hotels comparable to our proposed hotel project. We can use that 4P approach, right, that we learned during the CHIA, looking at proximity, looking at participation, looking at price, looking at the product, and all the things that we took into consideration when we were determining our competitive set. We can also use some of those same things when we're deciding who our comparable hotels are. So here we started with our list. We got a radial list, remember, because we have the coordinates for our project. So we can provide you with a radial list, and you tell us what you need on that. It could be in miles, it could be in kilometers. And here's what we've done for Nashville. We've gone through, we've looked at the different criteria using that 4P approach, and we've determined that these 5 hotels that you see here are our comp set, or excuse me, our comparable set. And then our comparable set here, you can see these are all upper upscale hotels. We do have one luxury hotel there in Nashville that we're going to include as well. So we want to open the financial template. We're going to go to the ADR and occupancy projections tab. Ooh, so we get to go to a different tab now. Office tab 1. We're going to enter the name of the proposed hotel as well as those of our comparable hotels. We're going to enter the number of rooms or keys, right? We're also going to enter the year and month that they opened into the spreadsheet. So let's take a look at that real quick, where that is in our template. So we're going to step off of the tab 1, summary assumptions. We're going to go over here to ADR and occupancy projections. That's tab 3. And right here, we're entering that information. Now, one of the things I want to point out here when entering the opening year and month, it could also be really helpful to understand the renovation history of these hotels. If one of these hotels, for example, and I happen to know that maybe a few years ago now, the Loews Vanderbilt underwent a complete renovation. Okay, everything. And so to say that that hotel is, a 30-plus-year-old hotel is not totally accurate, is it? If it's undergone a complete renovation. So I kind of leave that up to you as to what you might want to enter there, whether you want to enter the original opening date or if you want to enter the last renovation date. Probably depends upon how extensive that renovation was, right? As to whether we want to take that into consideration or not. So let's go to here. Step 10, estimating the proposed hotel's occupancy and ADR. Now we're going to obtain a trend report on those comparable hotels, right? Talked about that earlier, using our daily data, remember? So we get a trend report on our set of comparable hotels. We are, yep, you see, this is what it's going to look like. Primary comparables, Nashville feasibility study. This is a custom trend report based upon just that selected group of 5 hotels. That is why making sure that participation, that they are participating with STR, if you're including them in your comparable set, so that you can make sure they're all selected and included in your trend report. We can go to the 12-month average, monthly moving average tab, okay? And this is where we're going to be able to get some historic performance data on our comparable set. We're also going to include that information in our presentation as well. You saw something similar earlier on the market. We showed this same thing for our sub-market class. And now we're going to show this for our group of comparable hotels, right? So we started with a really big picture, we narrowed it down, and now we're even narrowing it down and fine-tuning it to the specific type of hotel that we're looking to build. These are comparable, again, to our hotels. So this would be of particular importance, right, to our investors. Here's looking at occupancy and ADR percent changes. That's not real encouraging there, is it? All right, let's, our inputs here. We're going to take from our trend report, yeah, occupancy and the ADR for the last 6 years using the running 12-month moving average data. We're going to enter that information in the ADR and assumptions projections tab right here, okay? You just entered this information on the hotels. Now we're just going to put the information down here. Comparable occupancies. Again, remember, we're making the assumption that we're in year 2017, okay? So we're entering the historic performance for the last 6 years for our comparable hotels. That's annual occupancy, and just below that, annual ADR. So that's all we're entering there, okay? The next step to estimating the performance of our proposed hotel based upon the comparable hotels, there are multiple approaches to this. You can use the average occupancy and ADR for the comparable hotels. You can use the averages for the comparable group, but then apply an index to that to estimate how the occupancy and ADR other proposed hotels will vary slightly relative to the performance of the group. So we've talked about indexing as well in the CHIA training, right? How do you compute an index? If we want to compute what we're essentially saying on an index of 100, is our proposed hotel going to perform at a higher level, above 100, or at a lower level, below 100, in comparison to our group of comparable hotels? You can work off the demand, the room nights sold of the comparable group, and use that to estimate the demand to get actual room nights sold of the proposed hotel on an annual basis. This is a little more time consuming and harder for beginners, certainly, but those are a couple of different approaches to doing this. If we're factoring in the occupancy index, in the training, we're going to use that index approach. That's what we're going to do. For the occupancy index, again, as we just explained, we're going to use it's the ratios between the proposed hotel performance and the corresponding data for the comparable groups. For the penetration, excuse me, we're using a factor of 100. Now in the training, they use that word penetration for occupancy, for ADR, and for RevPAR. For ADR, I typically don't think it's penetration when you think about ADR, but that is what they use in the model, okay? But we get the idea here, right? If the ADR index is greater than 100, again, higher ADR than on average our comp set, below, less than 100. Other things that we need to take into consideration in this approach, things like brand strength, the age and the condition of the other hotels in our comparable set of hotels, again, keeping renovation activity in mind there as well, and service levels. Other things to consider: inferior or a superior location, proximity to major demand generators. What are your target markets? Are they different? Are they similar to your other comparable hotels? Other things like corporate accounts, demand segmentation, number of rooms, number of amenities, revenue management strategies. There's a lot to take into consideration here, isn't there? So we want to find section 3 on that summary and assumptions tab of our financial template. And we're going to enter the occupancy index numbers for years 1, 2, and 3. And then years 4 and 5 will just duplicate what we entered for year 3. We're going to do the same thing for our ADR indexes. And then RevPAR will automatically be calculated based upon what we entered for our occupancy and ADR. So, Hector, this is sort of going along, I think, with what you were thinking right here, right? And that is that right here, occupancy, ADR, RevPAR penetration, this is what we're entering. We're saying that in year 1, we anticipate our occupancies will be on par with our competitive set. But as you notice, the ADR down here, a little bit lower, 98%. Again, that you might think that's a little higher, being a little aggressive or bullish, right, on those estimations. Year 2, 101 index. Year 3 at 102, and then it'll automatically populate year 4 and 5 again. Same thing here with the ADR. Slight improvement then up to 99. Then finally, we're going to reach be on par with our competitive set or our comparable group of hotels in year 3. And then we'll just carry that over into 4 and 5. Okay. That information is then carried over into the ADR and occupancy projections tab. So let's take a look at that again. Let's look at our template real quick and just make sure everybody understands where we're entering that information. Okay, so back here on the summary and assumptions, right down here in box 3, this is where we're entering that information, right? We're entering for years 1, 2, and 3 for our occupancy and our ADR. And then it's going to carry that information over to our performance for our competitive set, okay, that you see over here on the ADR and occupancy projections tab. That's what you're seeing right here. Okay, right here. All right, good. Any questions so far? We're going to finish up with these last couple of steps, and then we're finished with our template. But these are some important steps. Step 11, estimating the proposed hotel's revenues and expenses. So this is where we get to play around with some of the host or the profitability data, right? There's 3 measures, of course, included in the host reports or profitability reports on the summary tab. You may recall those: the ratios to sales, the amount per available room, that's an annualized room night per available room, and then the amount per occupied room night, and that was a nightly percentage or number. These are based upon the uniform system of accounts for the lodging industry, standard allocations for income and expenses that are used by the hotel industry. And so we're actually going to be entering some information, some detailed information related to different revenues, as you can see here, and some expenses, as you see over here on this side. This section, we're going to estimate our hotel's financial statement with the help of those comparable hotels. So something very important to think about here and look at, consider is, and we've mentioned this before, but not all hotels that are reporting standard performance data are also reporting P&L data. So you could have here 2 different sets of comparable hotels. Now, comparable in the sense of, are they like us, could mean one thing when we're talking about using that 4P approach, right? Comparable could mean something slightly different when we're thinking about revenues and expenses, right? It could have some of the same hotels. It could be some different hotels. If you do want to include the same hotels in your comparable group for both the performance data and the P&L data, make sure you get the participation list for both of those, specifically focused on that P&L participation list, because there's a good likelihood if they're reporting P&L data, they're also reporting performance data. But if they may not be, if they're reporting performance data, they may not be reporting P&L data. You know what I mean? So make sure that you check those. Again, it's not necessary that they both report, you know, both sets be the same hotels. But if you do want it to be, make sure that you look at that in the front end. So here is a participation list for Nashville. This includes all hotels. These are full service and limited service hotels. Here again would caution you though, if your proposed hotel project, for example, is an upper upscale full service hotel, then that's what you need to focus on in your comparable group, right? Full service hotels. You're not going to include limited service hotels because your revenues and expenses are going to be different, right? So you can get a participation list based upon full service or limited service hotels, depending on what your project is in your local market. For Nashville, here are the hotels we selected. Now you will notice that there's a hotel or two different here, right, than what we had in our comparable group. We had the Lowe's Vanderbilt in that first comparable group. We don't have it here. Here we've replaced it with the DoubleTree, another downtown upscale hotel. We're going to get a 2 or a 5 year host or profitability report on this comparable group of hotels. Okay, and then we're going to be entering some information from that into our template. In the absence of good comparables for P&L data, you can get some industry standards in another report that STR produces. Here in the US, this would only be available in the US, sorry, for those outside of the US, but here in the US, we also produce the STR Host Almanac, and that is very high level reporting, annual P&L reporting, full service hotels and limited service hotels. It does break it in then by class of hotels, location of hotels, and regions of the country. So again, in the absence of good comparable P&L data for an area, you could use sort of what are those industry averages for that area, that type of hotel, taken from the Host Almanac. CB Richard Ellis, the consulting firm, they're a great client of ours, by the way, great guys. We know them well. They also collect P&L data. They produce an annual, what they call a trend report. I can tell you their sample is roughly the same as ours in the US, about 5,500 to 6,000 hotels. Outside of the US, it's about the same. But that's another resource for you. We want to certainly let you know that they're available. You could reach out to them as well to see what information they have. So from our host report here, now this is based upon our 5 selected comparable hotels that you saw. We're going to be pulling specific information from that, and we've got boxed off here for you, and we're going to be plugging this into our template. So you see different information there related to revenues, departmental expenses, percentages, undistributed operating expenses, all kinds of good stuff here we're going to be inputting. Okay. So in section 6, hotel income and expense assumptions, in the summary and assumptions tab, we're going to be entering some of this information. Okay. Here's what we want to look at. This is box 6. And here's what we're going to be entering. It walks you through everything here, but you can look at the template and you can see specifically. Now, the format for this, the layout, as you can see, is very similar to the host reports. So essentially, it's just find it in the host report. The names are the same, okay? So it's just finding what area it is under. So for example, is it under, revenue or expense percentages? Is it under per occupied room? Or is it under per available room, a nightly number or an annualized number? That's what we need to plug in there, okay? We're going to be including this information in our 6-year pro forma. So tab 4 of our template. All right, so let's pop out there, take a look at that area of the template. Okay, so here's our 6-year pro forma, okay? And here's that information, where we are, what we are entering, okay? And you can see some of that is over here in the summary and assumptions. Tab 6, as we just pointed out, hotel income and expense assumptions. Again, at percentages of revenue, you can see the information we're entering there, per occupied room, and then per available room on an annualized basis. In the 6-year pro forma, again, some additional information we're entering here. Okay, revenues percentages, departmental expense percentages, undistributed operating expenditures, and then some of the year-over-year growth. Okay, the green numbers here will be calculated based upon what you've entered already. So again, not touching any of that information. Okay, so your P&L data can be taken straight from your host report or your profitability report. Okay. Step 12, this is our last step, but it's a big one, determining the feasibility of the proposed hotel. So the final step combines all of the data entered so far in our template to determine the feasibility of the project. We want to proceed now to the summary and assumptions tab of the financial template. We're going to be entering information in several boxes here, several sections, 9, 10, 11, and 12, okay? And then 13 is where we're going to get our answer. So 9, this is our unlevered IRR analysis. The IRR, or internal rate of return, is a metric used to measure the profitability of an investment. It is essentially the rate at which the cash flows of an asset over a period of time equal to the total initial investment cost. Given 2 hotels with the same cost to build and open, the hotel with the greater cash flows will effectively have a higher IRR and of course would be the favorable investment. There aren't any entries in this section as they're calculated by the model, but you can click on each of those cells and you can see where that information is coming from. Terminal cap rates. We know that terminal cap rates can vary, right? In most cases, it's safe to assume that the developer will sell high, ideally. This assumption depends upon how aggressive you want to be. So cap rates for limited service hotels have been in the 12 to 9.6% range, while luxury hotels would be in the 7.5 to 9.2% range. The terminal cap rate is a critical assumption and one that is often overlooked. It is also an unsavory truth that people who do feasibility analysis can manipulate this number to get the answer they want or the answer they think that their investors want to hear. This is showing you, these are US averages though, looking at cap rates, historic cap rates back through 2006 for different types of hotels. So you can see sort of what that average is there. The sale assumption, box 10. The model is going to assume that the subject hotel reaches its market stabilization in the 6th year of operation. The template determines the anticipated sale price by dividing year 6 net operating income by the terminal cap rate. Closing costs are going to be the fees paid at the closing of the real estate transaction. Usually these include fees paid to the broker in exchange for securing a buyer, as well as fees paid to legal counsel in exchange for counsel in negotiating or purchase agreement. Closing costs are then backed out to determine the net sales proceeds. The net sales proceeds then appears in box 9. And I sort of walked you through this early on, didn't I? What we see there in box 10. The net sales proceeds are then carried over to the unlevered IRR. Okay, so once we've come up with this calculation, and again, we saw this on an earlier slide, right? When I said we've reached our solution here, right? We walked you through that, taking the 6th year NOI, multiply that by the cap rate. We get our, we're going to come up with a gross sales proceeds number here. You see that? Break that divided by 300 gets our cost per key. We're assuming a closing cost of 3%. So that we're going to back that closing cost out of the 185 million up here, gets us at 179,444, broken down to a cost of 598,813 per key. That net sales proceeds then is going to be carried over here, and you see it entered right there. All right, number 11. This could be something that you could include, not always necessary, but certainly I think a good feasibility study, just like we do this when we buy homes as well, right? We look for comparables in the market to determine, you know, is this sale price, is what the asking price is, the transaction price, is it in line with what other hotels in this area, in this neighborhood are demanding? So you could research comparable sales. STR does track sales transactions in our hotel transaction almanac. Okay, we haven't included any of that here, but it's coming. You could look at other comparable hotels there as well. that have recently been sold. You could get the names of them, purchase date, what was the purchase price, how many rooms to determine then the cost per key, and then enter that in box 11 for your comparable sales. Good. The last thing here, our return summary. Well, not the last thing. Step 13 is the last thing. Return summary. This section requires no direct input as the model is going to calculate them for us based upon the cash flows from box 9. This box is going to display the potential investors a snapshot of the project's profitability. The unlevered IRR, which we talked about earlier, and the equity multiple, that depends upon the investor's goals. So some investors want to be in the hotel business or want a hotel maybe for some other reason. Publicly traded companies such as REITs, real estate investment trust, are agnostic. They don't care as long as they're making money, making profit. They don't care what is being invested in. It's all about that return on investment. In this case, things pencil out nicely as the equity multiple approaches 1.8 times. Although in today's market where there's so much capital chasing deals, that kind of number is becoming increasingly hard to find. Again, this was written a couple of years ago, so you got to assume that was on the high level of the market, probably not 2020 or 2021. Now we're in box 13, our feasibility analysis. A couple of things we want to talk about here. Of course, the first one is the hurdle rate. The hurdle rate is the rate determined by an investor or a company that is the minimum rate of return for them to accept the project. This box simply displays whether or not the IRR is greater than the hurdle rate. Generally, a hurdle rate would be chosen based upon the cost of capital and the consideration of how risky a project might be. Ground up construction is considered much more risky, so generally it requires a higher hurdle rate. A hurdle rate could also be the equity multiple or any metric that an investor requires from an investment. Now, as with the aforementioned equity multiple, it depends upon the investor's goals. Again, agnostic capital likes an unlevered IRR of 12%. But those deals are increasingly hard to find. Those who are able to access low-cost debt and other financing, such as mezzanine financing, might be willing to accept a lower unlevered rate as they can use financial leverage to bring the ROI into the high teens, which is what most investors are looking for in commercial real estate today. 12% conservative number, depending upon the financing, 11% might be acceptable to investors. I encourage you, read up a bit more on hurdle rates. How do you determine a hurdle rate? Okay, very important, vital to this project, because that is going to be the key number that we're going to be entering right here. So for the purpose of this project, this box, number 13, simply displays whether or not the IRR is higher than the hurdle rate. Okay, if it is, the answer is yes to that question, then this is a feasible project. Simple as that. Okay. All right. Let's pop back out there to our feasibility study template real quick. I want to show you some of those last boxes. Again, these are all in the summary and assumptions tab here. We just talked a bit about box 9, and we showed that to you earlier, right? Specifically focused on the net operating income through those first 5 and 6th year of operation. We walked you through box 10, the sales assumptions there. We talked about box 11. That was our comparable sales down here. Box 12. These were already calculated for us, right? We're not entering anything here. Okay, so we have our IRR, we have our property multiple, profit, and then the key thing, as I mentioned here, we're entering is that hurdle rate of 12%. So then all it is doing here is looking at this box and comparing it to what we put up here, what's entered up here in for our IRR, what was calculated for the IRR of 12.3%. And it says, is that IRR higher? Yes, it is. It's 12.3, slightly higher than our hurdle rate. So again, this would be the answer. This is a feasible project. Okay. All right. That brings us to the end of step 13. Do we have any questions? Is everyone still with me? Did I lose you? Okay. the last part here, getting started with our feasibility study project. This could certainly be the project that, you know, if you're a professor, that your students could, you're brave. I'm going to go ahead and say it, you're brave if this is the student project that you have them work on. Certainly you could have them complete a version of this. It could be a lighter version of this. We've talked about the availability of data. We know that the Share Center, you can obtain the data that we talked about earlier, the performance data, the pipeline data, the P&L data, the census information. All of that is available through the STR Share Center and STR. You can use this financial template. Excuse me. There's a step through a comprehensive feasibility study. And these are the 13 steps that we just walked through. And it's including here the number of slides that you would want to include in your presentation. So for the comprehensive version, as is outlined here, this would be approximately 40 slides. You could expand upon that actually and pull in a couple of components from the market study. And that's what you see here. The general makeup of the market. These were all in the section where you can find those right here. Okay, general makeup of the market, market trends, market breakdowns, types of business, and then some of the pipeline data. This is all drawn from the market study. And then you go into, at this point, your feasibility. Okay. There is an abbreviated version, a little bit shorter. We talked about a couple of those components we pulled out a while ago, those 3 areas, those 3 additional steps that you saw in red, that earlier slide. So that's going to knock a lot of this down now. This is coming down to about 20 slides. So those are some options, you know, for different versions of the feasibility study project, in addition to completion of that template. Now, again, you could select for your own training purposes. You could select your own location near you. You could make it somewhere interesting, an area maybe that your students would be more familiar with. We can provide you with the reports and data for that area. All right, let's walk through our quiz questions. I'm gonna answer any questions you might have, and then we're gonna talk just a few minutes about the exam. Then we're gonna finish up for the night, for today, okay? All right, let's go through our quiz questions here. Our first one, number 48, it says, what is a feasibility study as defined in the CAHTA training? Who knows the answer there? Please unmute or put it in the chat, whichever you'd prefer to do. Yeah, as we said early on, that in the training, it's the study to determine if it's a good business decision to build a hotel. Great. Number 49, what does it mean if the unlevered internal rate of return is greater than the hurdle rate? I hope everyone gets this because we just talked about it, right? Of course, that answer is C, right? That the project is economically feasible. Number 50, of the options below, which are tabs included in the financial template used in the CAHTA training? Of course, it's going to be all of the above, isn't it? Yeah, we talked about all of those. Number 51, the first step in a feasibility study is to define the project. What is one of the type of information that you must know for this step? D, B? Correct answer here is B, the number of rooms. I would argue that if you're doing this feasibility for a client, particularly a group of investors, yeah, it would be important to know who those investors are. Yeah, for the purpose of training, though, we don't really get into that, do we? But we do say that you should know the number of rooms. Number 52, what is not one type of construction cost? So you're saying FF&E is not one of our construction costs? That's FF&E, right? Food, financing, and employee related expenses? No, that's not right. We know that's not FF&E, is it? Sounded kind of funny, didn't it? Okay, number 53, the rule of 1,000 refers to total construction cost per key and dividing by 1,000 to arrive at what metric? The rule of 1,000 refers to taking the total construction costs per key and dividing that by 1,000 to arrive at what? There we go. Average daily rate. We're pre-opening ADR. Again, gets us in the ballpark of what we'll probably have it or right around it for our ADR, what we need, what we need for our ADR. Number 54, a key part of the feasibility study is where you use the economic performance of the market, the historic hotel performance of the market, and the future market supply changes to help estimate what? Revenues and expenses, occupancies and ADR. What do we think the answer is here? It's D. Nobody said D. It's D, the market growth assumptions. I'm so disappointed right now. Number 55, when reviewing historic hotel performance, you could display data for what two segments? There we go. D, that's right. Market and submarket class. Very good. Number 56, when analyzing future market supply changes, the main objective is to do what? Correct answer is A. Yeah, most of you got it right, I think. Yeah, there we go. Determine what hotels have recently opened or will open that will compete with your proposed hotel. Good. A few more here. Number 57, which is not an accurate statement related to sellout nights. Which is not accurate. We're actually going to go with D. D says there's no way to accurately count sellout nights for a group of hotels. We actually gave you a method for that, right? We said you could look at the daily data for your set of comparable hotels, look at an occupancy of 90% or higher, and use that as calculation for your sellout nights. So, number 58, when estimating market growth assumptions, what two metrics are you projecting? Yeah, you got that right. Occupancy and ADR. Those are the two that we were projecting. Number 59, which is an accurate statement related to comparable hotels? Of course, it's going to be all of the above, isn't it? Yeah. Number 60, which is not an accurate statement related to estimating the proposed hotel's revenue and expenses step of the feasibility study. Which one of these is not accurate? There's a lot to read there, isn't there? Which one is not accurate? Read the question. Related to estimating the proposed hotel's revenues and expenses. Correct answer is going to be B. B says that you need one revenue number and one expense number. No, we know that's not correct, right? We entered a lot of different numbers, didn't we? Number 61, to determine the anticipated sales price of the proposed hotel, what is the formula that is used? See, this is getting really into deep end, isn't it here? We're getting you into the deep end. See if you can remember this. It's like most of you have the right answer there. It is A, yeah. We divide the net operating income for year 6 by the terminal cap rate. Very good. That concludes our training using our PowerPoint here. All right. Do we have any questions? Any questions? Please.
Dwayne, it's Mark here.
Yeah, Mark. Hi.
Yep. I run a kind of cut down feasibility study as a subset of a project management subject.
Okay.
And I just wanted to hear from you about how you would define derived demand as it appears as in the assumptions Excel spreadsheet.
Do you include that? Do you include that in what you're using right now?
I do, yes.
Okay.
Because it wasn't in your sheet, was it?
Derived demand?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
No, we did not include that.
Okay.
But you are including it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I get them to do a demand generator, which is just mapping those, I guess, the infrastructure and other things that are around them that are going to draw people to the hotel.
Yeah.
And I kind of link that with derived demand and say that derived demand's kind of, they build it. If we build it, they will come. It's that additional growth in the existing market because you're in the market. Is that right? Is that how you would explain it?
Well, yeah. I mean, we call that latent demand.
Or latent. Okay.
Same thing, essentially.
Yep.
And as I said, that's one of the hardest things. We don't call it, we don't call it derived demand. That is one of the hardest things, as I said earlier, I think, to come up with, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
For sure.
Because it's really hard to know. I guess if your comparable set has a really high occupancy rate, maybe that might indicate that there's actually demand that's unmet, or supply that's unmet.
Right.
So you can add supply to the marketplace and fill your hotel just because it provides an opportunity for people to guarantee that they can visit.
Right, which is part one of that two parts that we were looking at when we're trying to make that determination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Overflow or compression, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that was part one. And part two was latent demand based upon, if we build it, they will come.
Yes. Yeah, kind of field of dreams stuff.
Do you use a template, or do you just have kind of a step through approach to your feasibility that you're having to do?
I use a cut down version of that Excel template. So we don't end up with a final IRR kind of decision number. I just mainly focus on them to do kind of tables kind of 1 to 9, and then for them to do some research into the demand factors that are going to draw people.
Gotcha.
And because they're developing a hotel concept, and so I'm basically trying to get them to do some market research and also come to a point where they say, these are the amenities that we're building, this is what we're offering that's unique and different in the marketplace. And I'm just getting them to think about the ADR market growth rates based on your trend reports, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I can imagine some of the concepts the students come up with for that, right?
Yeah, and
interesting stuff.
Some of them have done RevMan, which is Lauren's subject that uses a lot of these concepts, and then some have done finance, and we've just tried to introduce a bit of STR in 1 week of finance as well, just to kind of ground them in those KPIs, but using the kind of industry data that you guys can provide rather than doing it kind of theoretically.
Well, if you have, time, and this goes to everyone, take a look at this template, kind of play around with it a little bit. We would really like to get your input, especially for those of you who have some experience in teaching some of this area, even if it's in whatever capacity. Love to get your thoughts on this and what you think about the template overall. As I said, this is taking essentially the same approach that other, templates will, and I've seen those as well, what they use. I think it does simplify it a little bit. As complicated as this can be, honestly, I do think it simplifies it considerably. And with the step through approach, students can follow along with this. It's just going to be challenging for students to do. Absolutely, no question. But with this step through approach, like we've just done, as long as they have the data, then they could do it, you know? So if you do have any other questions about this, I'm certainly happy to answer those. But next thing I want to talk a little bit about now is the exam. I'm going to get an email out to everyone, sort of a wrap-up email. In that wrap-up email, we'll talk about the exam. You will have the opportunity to take the CAHTA exam online now, whenever you're ready. We do not have a deadline out there. I encourage you, do not wait too long though. The longer you wait, the more you're going to forget, or you're going to get busy and just forget to take the exam. And then it's going to be like, why did I sit through 10 hours of having to listen to this guy talk over 5 weeks and then not complete, right? By doing my exam and then turning it into my project. So I encourage you, take that exam. If you need to go back and listen to some of the recordings from the sessions, please do so. If you have questions, this does not just end tonight or today. Send me your questions in an email. Certainly I'll respond to those before you take the exam if you do have questions. It is a 50-question multiple choice exam with a 90-minute time limit. You need a 70% to pass. So it's just like the CHIA exam in that regard. I will send you a link to take the exam. You will register for the exam within the link, okay? So once you click on that link, that starts your process where you're going to register, and then you're going to immediately launch into the exam. So go ahead and have that time, you know, at least that next hour and a half blocked off for you to complete the exam, okay? That incidentally is the same exam, same link that your students will use in the future as well. They're going to enter some of their own information. They'll enter, who is my professor's name? What's my professor's email address? So when they complete the exam, you will also get a notification via email of the student's score. All right. It'll also tell you how much time they spent on the exam, by the way, which can be really interesting. All right. We talked about this in the first section. I want to go ahead and emphasize it again now. We'll discuss it now. So for the industry folks that are on here with us, and Hector and Norman, that's you. You're representing all industry. Once you take and pass your exam, you'll turn in your CAHTA project. You will receive your CAHTA certificate. Good job. Okay. For all of our other academics that are on with us, as we discussed, you need to take and pass the exam and then take a group of students through this training. Now, I understand that curriculums have probably already been set for the fall, maybe even already set for the spring of 2022. That's okay. You know, if this is in the future, go ahead and that's why I want you to go ahead and complete the exam now. Do your project now so that you have the experience of working on that project. So in the future, then, when you are able to offer this to your students, you will understand exactly what is going to be required of them. You will have gone through the same training. You will have taken the same type of exam. You will have worked and completed on the same type of project. Now, your students in the future, you take them through the training. That could be either in an online workshop format like we're doing. It could be in the classroom, integrated into a course. There are multiple different ways, and I would love to discuss that with you. And I will reach out to you individually to talk about that. But there are different ways you can deliver this to your students in the future. We have the training PowerPoints. We have a separate set of videos that Steve Hood has done that accompany each section within the CAHTA training. So it makes it real easy for them to review, watch the video. You can have a review session with them to go over the quiz questions, answer questions they might have. Again, you step through it section by section, then they take their exam online at the conclusion. They will then start working on their project. Again, they have to complete only one project to get their CAHTA certification. If you want to, they can work on a comprehensive version of a market study, for example, and then you could have them do an abbreviated economic analysis or an abbreviated event impact analysis. You can have them do the abbreviated feasibility study if you want to. So they have some experience, at least in touching, right? They've dipped their toe into these different research projects. Okay, that's completely up to you. And maybe those aren't great. Those are just for the experience of doing them. And we're going to be here to support you, whatever route you decide to go on those. Once they've completed their project, submit 2 of those to us. Okay. We're going to review those, especially the first time. We'll take a look at them. We can provide you with some good feedback, especially if it's the first time you've done this with your students. And then by doing that, you will have met the qualification and you will receive your CAHTA authorized instructor certificate. Okay, your CAHTA authorized instructor certificate. We don't really define what does a group of students mean. It doesn't have to be a large group of students. On the project, again, I would suggest, just like what you're doing, they could work on those projects individually, or you could have them work in a group of maybe 3 or 4 students. I think 3 or 4 is, and you all have experience with students and group projects, right? 3 or 4, I think, is probably the optimal number to have them work on that. But that's good. Okay. Again, I'll get that kind of wrap up email out to you. We do have some other upcoming before the end of the year. We are offering 2 more CHIA workshop series and then 2 more CAHTA workshop series. So if any of your colleagues would like to join us for some of those, please, I'll get those dates included there as well. And you can join us. As soon as this recording is finished from today's class, I'll put it in the Dropbox folder. You know, that's your single source. You can go to that same link to access all the recordings from all 5 of our classes. Okay. I'm also going to include in that email a survey. We'd love to hear from you. If you thought the classes were good, if you thought the communication was good, you liked the flow, or if you didn't, I want to hear that as well. All right. So please be honest. If you would, just take a few minutes and provide us with some feedback in that survey. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to be quiet. And do you have any questions?
Yeah, sorry, it's Mark here again. So just to confirm, I think your message you gave us was that from an academic point of view, we need 2 projects, not just 1 with our students. Is that correct? 1 full and 1 abbreviated, or is 1 enough?
No, 1 is enough. One is enough. They could do more than 1 project, but to meet the requirements for them to receive their CAHTA certification, and also for you to receive your authorized instructor certification, right? It's only requirement that they complete 1 project and that you're not assisting, supervising, advising as they complete that project. So they only need to complete 1 project. If you want to submit, once they do that, if you want to submit, I like to say submit 2 of them to me, or you can submit 1, that's fine. If it's a small group, you only maybe have 1 group of 3 or 4 students that are doing this in the class, that's fine as well.
Yeah. Well, we're doing the virtual market. We're doing the virtual market study comp this year. We're putting in a team of 4.
Yep.
And so kind of partnering with Lauren to kind of coach them through that. Is that okay if we?
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what several schools now, professors are thinking. They're like, we can plan this out. We can do the CHIA at a certain point. We can do the CAHTA training with them then. For their project for the CAHTA, they can do the market study analysis. Yeah. We've already got them in teams. Now they're prepared to participate in the STR student market study competition, right? Yeah. Some schools are having their own internal competition. They're doing it as a class to get their CAHTA. So they let the students, they group the students up to work on their project. They can do their own internal competition. And then maybe the winner of that competition is the one that represents their school in the global STR student market study competition.
I see. Yep. Yeah, we do that.
Right.
We do that for another comp, an industry comp, where we have an internal winner from about 10 teams, and that winner goes against all the other institutes.
It's putting your best team forward, isn't it? And it's kind of like them earning the right to, represent their school, which is quite an honor and a privilege. And honestly, that's something incredible for them to include in a resume in the future, I would think too, right?
Yep. Sure.
That's going to be impressive.
Good.
Did you have a question as well about your group? Did you have a question? Or am I thinking, did you just enter something in the chat?
Oh, no, I was just asking.
Or was that
whether-
related to that? Okay.
Yeah, whether we needed 1 or 2 projects to qualify.
Oh,
and
okay,
You said,
okay.
You said one's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Okay. Do we have any other questions? I think that's it. Okay. All right. Well, I have 10 o'clock, so my time. So we did great, right? All right. Well, that concludes this CAHTA workshop series. Thank you all so very much for joining me these last 5 weeks. I know you're all busy. Don't forget to work on those projects. Don't forget to take that exam. All right. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, not only for this CAHTA stuff, but if there's anything that we can do at the Share Center, if there's anything I can do personally to help with any class projects, any needs, data, information needs you might have, please feel free to reach out to me, okay? All right. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Have a good evening and have a great day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks. See you then.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.